Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to House Human Services. It is Friday, February 21st, and we have a few witnesses this afternoon picking up H91 again, which has been the theme of the week, an act relating to emergency temporary shelter program. So first up, we have Sarah Russell from the city of Burlington. So I see you on the screen, but I don't actually see, there you are. Hi. So I think this is the first time for both of our witnesses and our committee. So let's do a round of introductions. I am Ray Garofano. I represent Essex and Essex Junction.
I'm Esme Cole. I represent Hartford.
Hi, my name is Zon Eastis. I represent Guilford and Vernon.
Good afternoon, Todd Nielsen. I represent Brandon and Parkland.
I'm Doug Bishop. I represent Colchester's Chittenden 20 district.
Hi, Ann Donahue from Northfield and also representing Berlin.
All the way around.
Amy Johnson from My Care Partners.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm just
Brenda Siegel, Executive Director of Ed Homelessness Vermont.
Hello, Beverly Bogat from the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance.
I have the degree of dining circles.
I'm Lori, Committee Assistant.
Let's go to the screen. Jubilee. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jubilee McGill. I represent Bridport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
And Brenda Steady. Do you want to introduce? Sorry. Brenda Steady, East Milton, Westford. And then why don't we start? You're first on the agenda, Sarah. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me today. For the record, my name is Sarah Russell, and I'm the Special Assistant to End Homelessness for the City of Burlington, and I serve as co-chair for the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance. I appreciate you inviting me to speak to you today about the House Bill 91 and the GA Task Force report, as well as to share a local perspective of our on-the-ground experiences here in Chittenden County. After reviewing H91 and the GA Task Force report side by side and very closely, I see the following changes, positive changes to the policy. I see that you have expanded the season-long adverse weather conditions program. I see that there is some expansion in the Agency of Human Services reporting requirements. I see that there's an increased emphasis on a household's ability to remain within their home district. I also see the mandated written notice that is required, although the task force did recommend that legal services and Vermont Legal Aid be included in the denial and appeal letters. I'm not necessarily seeing that, but I do appreciate the emphasis on mandating written notices of decisions. And I also appreciate that a household may remain within the program until the outcome of an appeal has been reached. Those are all positive, I see as positive improvements and changes based on the task force report that was submitted. However, I don't see where substantial recommendations from the task force were incorporated into this bill. I will note that it's possible that some of the report's recommendations could be rules and that are not included in the actual law. But I do want to share some of the questions and concerns I have for what has been presented in the current version. First, the adverse weather does not specifically say that households need to meet categorical eligibility for seasonal shelter. Maybe that's an oversight on my part, but I'm confused if households do need to meet that categorical eligibility for the adverse weather conditions. There isn't any mention of income contribution, and I'm not sure if that has been removed entirely or if that is a rule that is left for the administration to develop. If it is the case that it is a rule for the administration to develop, I would encourage that to be shifted, there to be mention of income contributions within this law to make sure there are that the recommendations from the task force are incorporated in there. The eligibility criteria that's outlined in the current version does not align with what was submitted in the task force report. And I would stress that that eligibility criteria within that report be carefully reviewed and incorporated fully. At minimum, the third trimester of pregnancy should be replaced with pregnant person. We believe that people who are pregnant must have access to continuous shelter for the duration of their pregnancy, not just for the last portion of it. Excuse me. I also recommend that at minimum, the recommended language around protections for domestic and sexual violence, et cetera, be incorporated into the eligibility criteria. Those were recommendations in the report that were submitted directly from the network. So we feel like those protections are critical. I see in the bill that the max number of days of eligibility is set at 90 days with a less than 5% vacancy rate. And while this shows some movement toward a data-driven policy, which is what we are advocating for, it's actually a fraction of the amount of time that most households actually remain within a shelter program. Definitely does not align with the task force recommendations to use our coordinated entry data to drive the length of stay within this program, and definitely does not contribute toward one of the directives for the task force, which was to come up with recommendations around providing continuous shelter stay for households experiencing homelessness. I think there are several reasons that I see that additional thought needs to be given to this emergency shelter program. As I'm sure you're aware, the city of Burlington has been required to respond to unsheltered homelessness in an unprecedented way over the last winter due to the alarmingly high rate of unsheltered homelessness that we're seeing, and the vulnerability of those who do not have access to shelter, especially during the winter months. Our local data indicates that approximately 257 people are sleeping outside at any given time this winter in Chittenden County. For context, last year we had about 180 people recorded as sleeping unsheltered. And the year prior, before there were significant changes to the motel program, we had about 40 to 60 people sleeping outside during the winter. These massive increases in unsheltered homelessness is a direct result of reductions in shelter opportunities through the motel program and an overall lack of shelter capacity both locally and statewide. In response to this, with support from CVOEO, the city has opened an extreme cold weather shelter, decreasing the threshold temps the state deems eligible from -20 degrees to -10 degrees. And under this expanded criteria in Burlington, the city has operated the shelter for 8 nights this winter, staffed entirely by overtime staff, and resulting in over 550 bed nights with an average nightly census of 70 people per night. The medical, mental health, and substance use challenges that this population has shed light on the acuity of need among people who are sleeping outside right now is jaw-dropping. We are seeing incredibly unwell people being forced to sleep on the ground during this winter. And I cannot stress that enough. In Chittenden County, AHS has shared that 88 households will be exited from the motels on April 1st if the BAA does not pass. Within this 88 households, there are at least 12 families with children. Last fall, as I'm sure you're aware, the city was forced to make available temporary campsites at the North Beach Campground for families to provide some level of safe camping for children. And while it's certainly not acceptable to have children sleeping unsheltered ever, this won't be an option for families on April 1st. We can't have children living in tents in early spring in Vermont. In addition to overnight shelters, we see an increased need for daytime spaces as well. People who are living unsheltered need low barrier spaces to access resources, services, supplies, and meals. I learned recently that the funding for the Community Resource Center in Burlington has been cut from the proposed FY26 budget. The CRC is our largest and most accessible daytime shelter and sees as many as 200 people in a single day. With funding support from the city, the CRC has been able to expand to provide weekend hours during this winter. We cannot lose this resource, and I ask you to consider adequately funding daytime as well as overnight shelters in our communities. Lastly, I implore this committee and your colleagues in the legislature to seriously consider the impacts on not only the households that this law affects, but also the strain on municipalities and social service organizations who are stretched to their limits and beyond. The lift to support people who are living unsheltered has become impossible, and our numbers continue to rise while we continue to see both decreases in funding and in the state's diminishing role in shelter provision. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there questions for Sarah? Go ahead.
Just a request. I don't see at the moment that we have a copy of any written
Oh, yeah.
testimony. I think you were reading some from prepared remarks that had a lot of important data in it that I would love to ensure that we have, so.
It's hot off the press. I'll send it yes.
All right.
as soon as we wrap here today. Thank you.
That's appreciated. I guess one question, can you speak a little bit more to the pressures on the municipality that you were referencing at the end there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in Burlington, we have been able to mobilize really rapidly to stand up shelters when the temperatures fall. We use a piece of our criteria in Burlington includes 4 hours of -10 temperatures, and that's including wind chill. The state's threshold criteria for operation of extreme cold weather shelters is -20 degrees. And I think that what we know is with the number of people, that's a very antiquated and very cold, quite frankly, temperature. And with the number of people that we have outside and the level of need that they have, when we opened this shelter, the first week that we opened for 3 nights. And on the first night, we had 4 people in wheelchairs who accessed the shelter. We had about 6 people who were completely incontinent, who came in with clothing frozen to their bodies from being outside in those temperatures. I think that there was a need for us to open this shelter at -10. And in terms of the lift, I mean, I'm one person at the city. I think that the city of Burlington is, we're in a different position than other municipalities across the state that don't necessarily have my position. And to be clear, my role was never to be a shelter operator when I was hired by the city. It was much more of a policy and systems level role. And the way that we have had to flex to open this shelter includes a lift from multiple city departments, including our fire and EMS, our Parks and Recreation Department, our certainly CEDO, in addition to our police department. The social workers from our police department are also providing staffing coverage. We've had to reach out to our partner organizations to ask it to try to build our staffing rosters to make sure that we have safe staffing ratios for this shelter. And that's been expensive because we've had to pull all of the staff that work at this shelter have day jobs. So they're having to work overtime shifts in order to make sure that we can maintain the, safe staffing ratios. So I think just in the administration, alone of this particular shelter, it's been, a very heavy lift for the city. But I think that we know that we're not catching everyone. We know that there are still people outside. And this model of rapid pop-up extreme emergency shelters is absolutely not sustainable for Burlington, even with my role in place. I don't think that other communities have the ability to be able to operate in that fashion.
Sarah, I have a couple questions. Can you talk a little bit more about the medical needs that, we've heard a lot about the, medically vulnerable populations and the needs that they have, and just kind of want to hear more from you about, we heard yesterday from Vermont Interfaith Action that they're running their shelter, their cold weather shelter, an all volunteer basis. And they're doing a great job, but like acknowledging that those folks don't have the expertise or training
Yeah.
required to help folks that have a lot of medical vulnerability. So I wonder if you can talk about the staffing that, I appreciate that a lot of these folks have other jobs in the city, but is there a matchup of expertise that is helping staff the shelter to help support the people that have the medical needs?
Yes. So knowing that we have these medical needs, I also operated this shelter for 3 nights in 2023 when the temps dipped to, I think they were almost 40 below that cold snap that we had a couple of years ago. So from that experience, and also, knowing and hearing from providers the level of medical need that folks have, we've done a couple of things. We've paid special duty to Burlington firefighters who are also, EMS, to come and provide some coverage at the shelter. We have a physician who works for one of our nonprofits, the Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform. He has volunteered some hours at the shelter. And then we've also been incredibly lucky. Like I cannot sing his praises enough, but a volunteer through the Medical Reserve Corps who has been at the shelter and done shifts the last few times that we've opened. And that has been instrumental in our ability to have some on-site medical support. That we try to make sure that the staff, also, while they may not be certified in first aid and CPR, although many are, that they have, some basic first aid skills. And everyone is trained in Narcan administration. So we're doing our best. I think the challenging thing for me is that, when folks come into shelter for one night, we're seeing the wounds that people have. And I mean, I on a human level, I mean, I've been a social worker in Burlington for over 20 years now. Like, I have never seen the just level of folks being unwell as what we're seeing right now. So even though we're providing wound care to folks, we're providing new, dressings for wounds and bandaging, their legs or their hands, we're sending them back out into the freezing cold again, knowing that one night, we were able to redress a wound, but that only lasts for, a day or so, and then that needs to be done again. I think that foot care is a huge challenge. I personally had to cut off a pair of sneakers from someone's feet, including their socks, because they had not been able to shower or remove their shoes and socks for upwards of 3 months. And, certainly we were able to provide some level of care in that moment, but then again, we're sending folks back out to the cold. So, I could go on about medical needs. I hope I've provided some context without being too long-winded.
Thank you. Representative Bishop.
I was just gonna make one last point. It's not even a question, but I was struck by the reference to the temperatures in which the state and the city have used. My wife is a teacher in the city of Burlington, and they don't take the kids out when it's 0 degrees, either actual or wind chill temperature, and that's for 20 minutes that they'd be taking them out.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Another question, sorry, but we have time. So can you talk a little bit about your collaboration with CVOEO, which I think is a community action agency in Burlington? And then any relationships or direct collaboration with Department of Mental Health or VDH around substance use to help folks like, and Dale, right? Like there's some resources that might be available that could help connect people to the right, either right services or housing opportunities. So if you can talk a little bit about what Burlington is doing.
Sure. We work in very close partnership with CVOEO. So CVOEO, it's kind of unique. I would say, well, it's not. I would say backwards. It works well. It's just different than our other relationships for these kinds of projects. Is that usually the city is the funder or the pass through for funds to nonprofit organizations, and in this situation, CVOEO is actually the fiscal agent for this particular extreme cold weather shelter. And then they partner with the city on operations. So we're working, side by side in this work. They have been just the most phenomenal partners in this, like flexible and accommodating and kind and trustworthy partners in this work. So I really cannot say enough about our partnership with CVOEO. I think when you mention, connection to resources or, housing opportunities, through DMH or Dale or other, state programs, something that I think I want to make really clear is that this shelter is an emergency response to like a crisis, to extreme cold weather. We do the very best that we can to connect folks to resources when they come in, but it's only operating for, we operated on Monday night for one night. And there's kind of only so much that we can do. And I think one of the things I'd really like to highlight is that when people don't have, and I don't want to, kind of over explain this, but when people don't have access to stable shelter, their priority becomes survival. So when people enter this shelter, one, they are absolutely traumatized by the cold. We ask people to sign a guest agreement, and oftentimes they haven't been wearing gloves and they can't even hold a pen in their hand when they first come in. So our first priority is ensuring health and safety, meeting those basic needs. So most of the time when people come in, like I said, they're freezing. We're blessed to be able to offer hot showers at this location. People sometimes haven't showered for weeks at a time, so they're coming in to use to get a hot shower. They just want a cup of coffee. They haven't eaten maybe for the day. We have hot meals on site. And our goal really is around meeting those basic human needs that folks have. Over the course of the night, we are, trying to engage with folks. There's constant engagement with staff, to ask them, what are they working on? Are they working with someone? I had the opportunity to sit with someone on the Tuesday morning before she left, and she was, just sitting on her cot and tears were just falling out of her eyes. She had come in to sleep. She was very unwell. And I said, "Are you working with anybody on housing? Like, what can you do?" And she said, like, it's hopeless for me. Like, I haven't been in housing so long and I feel like there's nothing for me. Like, why would I try? And, I think that the level of hopelessness that we see among people, it's like, what can I say to her? Our housing authority has said because of federal funding, cuts anticipated, they're not issuing any more Section 8 vouchers for the remainder of the calendar year. What can I say to this woman? I think it's like we can talk to folks about substance use treatment, and that's so limited and it's so time sensitive. And now at our main facility, you can't even have methadone when you're there. And then they're going to stay there for 10 days and they're going to feel like hell. And then they're going to go right back out to the street. It's not the long-term thinking and planning becomes impossible when we have this many people who are living unsheltered. And the primary focus becomes just day-to-day survival. So I don't know if that answers your question or if that's too much information, or if there's a different way that I can answer that. But I mean, that's really what we're just managing survival right now.
Thank you. Are there any
Can
other?
can I
Yeah,
ask
go
a
ahead.
question? Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you. Sorry, I couldn't be there today. Sarah, so you help operate this life-saving tool we have for really inclement weather. Can you talk about your thoughts on that environment, like kind of mass congregate shelter as a tool, more of a long-term tool as part of um, our landscape? Do you think that is a place where we can help people thrive, or is it something we really should be sticking to only for when we have these extreme needs to get people out of the elements?
That's a great question. I think that historically have I would have never said that congregate shelter is the answer, and I still don't think it is for the vast majority of people. I think that there is a time and place for, for congregate shelter. I think it can be successful. Certainly not with 90 people under one roof. I can tell you that. But I think that people really need to have their own space. Their folks experience the people that we're serving in these shelters experience a high level of trauma, and carry that with them. Managing 90 different personalities under one roof is incredibly challenging and taxing on staff. And it also doesn't provide a setting where people can kind of let their guard down, right? So, we don't have, I mean, knock on all of the wood in the world, have not had significant, safety concerns. We haven't experienced significant theft, by any means. But these are the things that folks are contending with in an environment where there are so many other people around. It's like a lack of sort of personal safety, that they're still on guard, kind of all the time. And I think that that's really at the crux from a, trauma, lens, and from a best practice, is that if people don't have a secure space that feels like their own safe spot, then it's really hard for them to kind of let that guard down and build trust, and to focus on, again, anything other than survival. And so I think that, congregate shelter, in an emergency situation is, I mean, you got to do what you got to do to keep people alive. That's the truth. But what we're really looking for is to engage with people and to help them feel safe within a shelter setting, to help them to build trust and maybe like restore some shred of that hope that there's something else. We need to provide spaces that feel safe, that provide that give people those things, which is a non-congregate setting.
Thank you.
Can I
Any
ask
other-
one more
Yeah.
question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
we have plenty of time. So.
Okay, great. So you already kind of mentioned this and just like the effect this is having on our workforce. I've also worked in this kind of in housing and housing insecurity for a while, and it used to be you could, there was a lot, you dealt with a lot, but there was these wins that kind of kept you going. And now those successes, like getting a family into housing, getting a senior into housing, you don't have as many of those. And I think kind of you never see it in the job description, but for our service providers and shelter providers and people doing this work, a huge part of their job is keeping folks' hope alive, and being that that person who keeps them going and championing them, and that they're like you said, there's just nothing. So I'm just wondering, and we've had some conversations about the real impact this is having on people, but if you might be willing to talk about some of that real stuff that's happening for workers in this industry right now.
I think that I really appreciate you naming that, Jubilee, because I feel like while I kind of moonlight as a direct service worker when it comes to these shelters, it's not something that I'm immersed in every day. Um, and from my experiences operating this shelter, and I guess, I mean, we operated a season-long shelter last year, so that was, you know, a little more immersive. Um, But I think that what you said about, you know, a direct service worker, our workforce, their job really at the core of it is to instill hope and, you know, to kind of support folks with their goals, you know, around housing. And when our direct frontline staff feel hopeless um, about systems level change and about the lack of resources, it's very difficult and quite honestly disingenuous for us to work to instill false hope in the folks that we serve. I think one of the hardest things that I've had to do that I you know that I've experiences and interactions that I have had with people operating this shelter is that in the morning when people are leaving and it's still 10 below zero and they're saying, so I'll see you tonight. I'll come back here tonight. I'll see you tonight. And I'm saying, no, it's only going to be -8 tonight, you know? And so then they're saying, well, where can I go? Where should I go? You know, and it's like, I have no answer for people, you know, like, do I want to say, oh, you can, you know, go here, oh, you can call 211, or, oh, you can, I know there's no motel, you know, I know there's no shelter capacity. I know what they're going to be told when they go everywhere. And so, like, why would I tell them to do those things knowing that they're just going to get the door closed every time? And it literally breaks my heart to tell people that there is nothing for them, or to sit with this woman that's like, you know, I could talk to her about treatment and like maybe she would be interested in going, but there's no light at the end of the tunnel. You know, a lot of time, you know, I think that for that external motivation, and we hear about how successful contingency management programs are, is because we're giving folks an incentive, right? Like, we're incentivizing recovery, and these programs, they really work. But when you don't have the incentive of like housing or shelter or anything for people, it's like, wow, how can we build that motivation for, you know, behavior modification? Like, it can't be done. And I think that that wears on direct service workers. I mean, like I said, it's like I've had to open this, I've been there every hour that we've been open for 8 nights this winter. And the level of heartache that I feel, I can't even imagine what it's like to do this for 40 plus hours a week for our frontline staff. So yes, it has far reaching impacts.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Just wrapping up with Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for the amazing work that you do. We so appreciate and really acknowledge how challenging this is on you, the people you support, your team, City of Burlington, and other communities across Vermont. We acknowledge that. I really appreciate you being here and sharing about your with us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time, and I will send my comments into you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mary. Mary, thank you for being here. You represent Bennington Housing Authority, the Balance of State Continuum of Care. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. I am honored to serve with Kim Ennetsberger as the co-chair of the Balance of State Continuum of Care. And I apologize, I had intended to be there in person, but couldn't. I do have some statistic documents that I will be sending up for you. And certainly anything else you need, I'm happy to reach out. So you probably all know this, but what is the Balance of State Continuum of Care? And the reason I'm saying that is because when I first got involved in it, I was like, what's a continuum of care? It's not a name that any of us would pick, but it is the name that HUD has designated through the McKinney-Vento Homelessness Act as being a a distributing arm of HUD funds that come into the state. Vermont has two continuums of care, ours, which is the balance of state that I'm here representing, and also the Chittenden continuum of care. And what that's about is that we get the funds and we have what's called a lead agency, which for us is the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont. Frank is the executive director of that. You probably all know him. And what happens with that is they are what's called a lead agency. They take the lead in the funding, and we need to make sure that this funding is distributed to the people that need it throughout the state. And the lead agency takes the funding, and we then have, I'm sorry? Oh.
Sorry, we just had somebody sneeze.
Oh, bless you. I may do that myself shortly. So then the lead agency presents and collects different applications. They're called Notice of Funding Opportunities, NOFOs in acronym. And then the state continuum of care decides who's going to get those. Our board of the state continuum of care has one representative from each of the 11 housing coalitions throughout the state that aren't in Chittenden. And we have two representatives that are self-identifying as currently or formerly without housing and homeless. We have a representative from the Vermont Agency of Human Services, as well as one representative from various housing partners, whether that is the Conservation Board, the Housing Financing Agency, et cetera. And then we have 3 to 6 other members from specified categories, whether they are veterans, runaway youth, domestic violence, people fleeing domestic violence, et cetera. So we try and link all of the services together throughout the state for the folks who are in need of establishing some sort of self-sufficiency so that they can in turn defeat their homeless situation. And one of the primary groups in all of our areas that does this is the coordinated entry team. They're the ones that collect data. They have workers. They interview the people who are currently homeless or in danger of homelessness. And there's a large form to fill out in terms of what's happened to them in their life and all that sort of thing. Now, the coordinated entry team, and I'm speaking with my Bennington hat on because that's the only place in Vermont I've lived, but our coordinated entry team in Bennington is really active and really wonderful. And we have people on that team that are called housing navigators, but we also have people that aren't necessarily housing navigators, but that can provide other services, like folks from Turning Point, folks from United Counseling Services, folks from the Department of Labor, Vermont Center for Independent Living, so that we try to all come together and work with the folks on coordinated entry, because the goal obviously is to have them become self-sufficient enough to retain housing. Now, in Bennington, our coordinated entry team, Brock is what's called our lead agency, and they are severely understaffed. So we have people from other organizations also joining in to become coordinated entry people that meet with the clients and establish a trusting relationship. This is whether they're at a motel or in a campground down the street, etc. I can tell you a story about one person in particular, Michelle, from the Sunrise Family Resource Center, which you may or may not have heard of. And before I say this, let's bear in mind that in Bennington, we currently have on our coordinated entry list for people that are homeless, 390 folks. And 64% of those are families. only 36% are individual. Many of them are living in motels right now. So we're not talking about, there's this, I'm sorry, but this sort of image that a lot of people have that folks living in the motels just don't want a job and, they have some sort of substance misuse problem and they're just living on our dime. No, that's not how it works. You know that. Your Health and Human Services, you're all about providing services for humans that are suffering. And so in Bennington, we have the 390 people. And then in addition to that, we have at risk of homelessness, which means they're being evicted or their house was condemned or whatever, 70 more people, 86% of which are families. This is incredible. So in an effort, and of course, like every place else, we don't have enough housing down here. And so we have landlords who are willing to fix up properties, and some of them have gotten VHIP funds. But currently we have 0 VHIP funds in Southern Vermont through NeighborWorks. We really need those funds. We have landlords that can fix up places, but they can't afford it because they're small landlords. They're not your big commercial landlords. So we need those funds. Now, Michelle at Sunrise, we're going to lose her services for the coordinated entry people because now that the ERAP funds are gone, unless you help us put those same funds into the HOP budget, Michelle has worked for years with folks who are homeless. Michelle has helped set up a every 6-month program because a lot of times the people on coordinated entry, the landlords want their credit score. Well, come on now. You've been homeless for 3 years. What do you think the credit score is going to be? They want landlord references. Nope, not working either. So what we need is we need to establish relationships. Michelle sets up these Renter 101 things once every 6 months. And it's 3 days from 10 to 2, lunch is included. And we invite landlords, people on coordinated entry, as well as community partners. The first day is about getting ready to rent, like what do you need to know to fill out forms, et cetera, et cetera. The second day, that Tiffany from the Housing Authority usually comes down to do that. Rebecca from Legal Aid comes, and it's know your rights, both for landlords and for tenants. The third day is a landlord forum where the landlords are like we say, what are you looking for in a tenant exactly? And a lot of these landlords have gotten funds to fix up their buildings. Now, I can tell you a very nice story about them interacting with some tenants. There was a family who had been homeless for quite some time, consisting of a differently abled African-American man, his wife who was pregnant, and their baby. They had already applied to some of these same landlords for housing and gotten turned down because of their credit rating, because of no landlord reference. Well, guess what? After coming to this meeting and the landlords meeting them who didn't even realize they had already turned them down twice, they got housed the following week. So it's really about developing a relationship. And that's what Michelle does. She takes folks to meet the landlords. So instead of looking at a paper, they're looking at people who are saying, look, we're trying everything to get out of our situation. But here's the problem. When people are unhoused, I'm a mother, I'm actually a great-grandmother, okay? If my children don't have somewhere safe to sleep for the night, I can't think about going and getting a job. I can't think about going and getting an education. I want to know, do my kids have food and are they going to be okay tonight? once I have that security, I can start to develop the self-sufficiency in other areas, which is what our coordinated entry team and all of our associates try and do for folks. And the motel program certainly provides a really good interim step because the people from coordinated entry go to the motels, establish the relationship, and then folks can become self-sufficient. That's what we all really want and need. And that's what we're asking you to be our heroes for, is please help people to get through this situation and actually become stable and have the self-confidence to participate and become a good participator and a good community member who then can help other people do the same. And relative to Sarah's thing about congregate shelters, I will say that here in Bennington, we've been trying to, and VIA actually has been helping, trying to set up under our local emergency plan some kind of cold weather shelter because our shelters are full. Our landlords aren't here able to, well, the landlords that will accept the tenants that need the housing the most without a good credit score, even based on some assurances by community partners, they aren't able to house people because they can't get the funds to fix up their buildings. So what we really need is the motels as a stopgap measure. And we also need your support on VHIP funding and on turning those ERAP funds that were for coordinated entry into a HOP budget that will allow people like Michelle to continue helping folks. Also, congregate shelters, as Sarah pointed out, are not, yes, I mean, you're going to save people's lives, no doubt about it. And that's great. But that's not going to help them keep from being in that situation again. They need the substance misuse. They need counseling, or they need job counseling. They need to know their kids have somewhere to sleep before they can even think about going to apply for a job. And that's what we're asking you, because you are health and human services, to deliver to the humans in our areas. And I want to thank you for everything you have done and are going to do.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. I'm Teresa Wood. I wasn't here when Sarah got started, but I have been able to hear all of your testimony. I have a question for you because I mean, we all knew that the ERAP funding was going to end. It was federal funding, you know, it had a little bit of lifeblood. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit and ask if it's such a priority, you know, so if this has been really successful in having people who specialize in that landlord-tenant relationship development, then why wouldn't the COC prioritize that as a use of resource, you know, for the money that's coming into the COC?
Well, I'm not saying that they wouldn't prioritize some of it, but first of all, we're expecting to get big funding cuts based on the climate.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all are for everything, frankly.
Yeah,
but.
I know that. I know that. I hear you. And second of all, because of the fact that in Bennington, for example, there's a whole different, and you know this, I'm sure your town is a different demographic than my town, which is Bennington. And so it's not like we can say, oh, we have to give Bennington more because of this coordinated entry thing. Now, typically, we didn't have to worry about giving that to coordinated entry. First of all, we probably aren't even going to have, there are certain parameters that are outlined in HUD's notices of funding opportunity. We can only do with the money what those parameters allow us to do. And unfortunately, the kind of thing I'm talking about isn't the kind of thing. To operate a shelter, yes. So for example, the Bennington County Coalition for the Homeless can apply for funds from the state COC to help with their burden, which they do an incredible job trying to manage. But that being said, that's because it is a shelter. So the federal act that gives us the funds from HUD specifies certain purposes, and we have to be within those parameters. And one of the purposes doesn't involve coordinated entry specifically. It does involve coordinated entry, collecting statistics to report back to all of you and to HUD. And it does require, we do, as you are, I'm sure, aware, a point in time count throughout the state, which is also interesting because most of the folks that are living outdoors right now in this area would prefer to remain invisible. So that we don't often get, excuse me, an accurate picture from those, but it's still good. But the point is that I was trying to make is that a lot of the designees for funding that HUD has are not coordinated entry teams, which is unfortunate. I could probably provide you with some more material on that, which I will be happy to do when I send out my other stuff to you all. Thank you for asking, though.
Thanks, Mary. I mean, I think that one of the things that we are really trying to grapple with is the role of the HUD funds coming in through coordinated entry and COC, and the role of HOP funding and where that fits in, and the role of shelters. And really, we're trying to develop a more integrated system than what exists now, because it's kind of a piecemeal right now. And
it is.
And, you know, when we look down through some of these things, you know, and it may not be true, but it appears like there seems like there's overlap in, you know, several areas. Like,
I understand.
And I think, you know, what we're trying to make sure is that, okay, we all know that there's limited dollars and we don't, you know, money doesn't grow on trees. So we're trying to make sure that we make the best use of the dollars that we have. And recognizing, I fully understand what you're talking about. The HUD money comes, all federal money and all state money, all taxpayer money comes with strings, you know, and you got certain things that you have to meet, you know, because we have to be accountable for the public funds that we're spending. So I get what you're saying about, you know, HUD's got certain expectations for the money that they send down to us, and just like the state has certain expectations for HOP funds that they, you know, send out. And I think our job is trying to match all that out and match that all up and figure it out, and figure out, you know, places like we have several different entities right now providing rental arrearages funds. Okay. For me, that does not make sense. You know, we have one statewide organization, which is relatively new at doing it. And then we have sort of a piecemeal approach across the state. Some HOP grantees do it and some don't, but that's just kind of like one example. And we got lots of different people doing what they call service coordination or case management. And yet we have waiting lists for, you know, coordinated entry, just to even get into coordinated entry and do that initial assessment. So, you know, trying to figure that all out. And if you don't get into coordinated entry, that's the place where public housing folks are taking their referrals from. So if you don't get into coordinated entry, you have a less of a chance of getting, you know, permanent housing. So trying to figure out where are the gaps in the system and not to add to the duplication.
I think that's a really valid point, and I would agree with you. And what I would say is that, so the HOP funds have been going to, Brock is our lead agency, okay? But not strictly for coordinated entry. That's why, for example, we have the Turning Point Center also doing assessments. We have Sunrise Family Center doing assessments. That's where Michelle is. Because there isn't enough funding, from the lead agency. And they are also using some of it for rental arrears. I hear you. But so even if we don't have the ERAP funds, the state COC funds are not going to be something that we can specifically deliver to coordinated entry. And in my personal opinion, coordinated entry is probably the most important part, because if you want to cut down the budget eventually on homeless prevention, the only way to do it is to help people achieve the self-sufficiency that coordinated entry can help them do. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Mary. Other questions for Mary? All right, I am seeing that you have covered the landscape for us, Mary, and
Okay.
thank you very much. We love to hear from the far reaches of Bennington, and thank you for being here today, and thank you to Sarah for being here, and what you all are doing at the local level to help people, each and every day. We really, really understand some of the stresses you're under, and as I said to somebody just a little while ago, the skiers are praying for more snow, and I will bet that people working in the homeless community are not praying for more snow. They're praying for warm weather. So,
Correct.
All righty, take
Well,
care,
thank you
everybody.
very much. Thanks for all of you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, team.
Chair, can
Yeah.
I chime in? I'm thinking it might be helpful for folks if we could arrange. I know we've tried to do it in the past. It's very complicated, but have kind of a COC coordinated entry one-on-one training for folks, and also to kind of go over what all the programs are in our collaborative application to HUD, and possibly even let you guys see like what a NOFO looks like, and then what our application looks like, and the very specific. It's not like HOP. There are very like we do part of the application, like I'll just say for VCRIP is for this little pot of diversion funds, and these are the eligible activities, these are the populations. But I'm just thinking it almost seems like we're moving in a direction of trying to create a new system, but really we have this system that exists that we have to use and are very limited in how we can change it. We can shore it up and we can be better, but I want to make sure the systems work together. And I feel like it might be helpful for you all to get a better understanding of what the current system looks like, that we kind of have to work within.
I think that would be a great idea, Jubilee, because I think, for folks who are working in it, every day, it's sort of one thing. For, those of us who only hear about it through the work that other people are doing, and it's honestly, it gets to be more confusing, like, understanding.
I've been working in it for years, and I still sometimes get confused. And then just like we do in the state, we have rules change, and then the guidance changes, and so and eligibility changes, and we are likely going to see a whole lot of new rules on how we function. I'll connect with you and circle up. Actually, Sarah Russell, who was just here, did a lot of training videos as part of our HHAV kind of new hire training. So maybe we can connect with her, because I think she's really good at explaining it.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to that, because what we're trying to create, for sure, we don't want to supplant what is being done, and the resources coming into the state for that. We want to, whatever that is that we're doing, we want it to work in concert with that system, and So I think that it would be helpful for us to have, Ray just said, we kind of need a diagram about, you know, how all of these pieces fit together. If somebody out there has a diagram that.
I am compiling things and I will send it out to the committee this weekend. It can all be found on the Helping to House website or directions. It's kind of hard because some of our HUD links are down, but I will collect what we have. There are some diagrams, some charts, some one-pagers and things. So I will be sending you all a collection of information for you to look at.
Okay. And I think that Lily Sojourner last year, when we were talking about the bill, gave us a diagram about what that looks like in Vermont. Maybe I'm not remembering that correctly, but
Lily and Ari Kistler have been working on a great spreadsheet. That had kind of already been in the works, and we've added some things. I got a chance to show it to Ray, and she really appreciated it and had some suggestions. I'm gonna forward it to you since I'm not there today to show it to you.
Okay.
For you to take a look at and let us know if it's worth it for them to continue kind of fleshing it out.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I think that would be helpful. Okay. Folks, we have had a busy week with lots of witnesses this week. And guess what? There's more to come. Not today though. So we are hoping to wrap up testimony in 91, hopefully on Tuesday. And then really start sort of in pieces to start to roll out language. So, you know, what I'm hoping we can build on success. And so start with the easier stuff, like what are the aspirational goals? You know, talk about eligibility, talk about things that are elements of the system. I did meet with, Ray and I met this afternoon with DCF folks to kind of lay out where our testimony has been. And they've had people in the room off and on. And they have some ideas that they want to share. And Lori, Chris can't make it, and but Lily can make it in that time frame, but on Zoom instead of being, you know, in person. She might have to leave a little bit earlier, but so I think that you know, we'll hear from them next week also. And we'll really sort of start to sort of think about what are the components that we want to see in this bill, and looking at the recommendations from the task force, looking at the testimony that we have taken, because we have taken a lot of testimony. We have a lot of documents to go back and look through, and a lot of things to think about in terms of components. And at the same time, we have to get our budget memo done, and we have to get 218 done. So we're going to have a busy week next week, bouncing around a little bit on stuff. So that's what next week looks like. Thank everybody for all of the work that you are doing and continue to do on your budget stuff and sort of nailing down those things that we talked about earlier today. I think that we'll be in a decent place to at least sort of, I guess what I would say is put forth, you know, what we think that Vermonters need, and then identify what we think are the sort of top level priorities. And some of those might be little things like empty arms, and some of those things might be bigger, like COLA increases in rate study implementation. So we'll see how that all sugars out, but we will have to make those decisions next week. So prepare yourselves for having some intense discussions about what makes the top of the list, and everybody's going to be advocating for their stuff, and we'll have to figure it all out together. Okay, I think that's it for today, unless anybody else has any questions about what's coming up. Anything that you need advice on?
I guess I would just reinforce the conversation that Jubilee started and others were involved in, that something that helps with this big picture. We've heard, as you said, the volume of testimony we've had has been significant. And reinforcing some of that testimony by understanding the roles of the players would be very helpful.
Yeah. And I think that will be very helpful as we look to think about kind of a new paradigm. You know, we're talking about a significant paradigm shift in where we go. So I think that it will be important to see those roles and responsibilities of current players and how might that change? How might that be the same? How they might shift a little bit? So yeah, I'm kind of a visual person on seeing things like that myself. So we'll see what we can pull together from Jubilee, and I'm gonna look back at last year's stuff.
Find anything.
Did you find Lily's stuff? Yeah, okay, so we'll look at Lily's stuff from last year, and she's going to be here next week as well. Okay, thank you, folks. Thanks for everything you've been doing, and more to come.